Good morning and welcome to the Palm Springs Historic Site Preservation Board meeting, Tuesday, November 13th, 2018. Roll call, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Member Marsh? Here. Member Kaiser? Here. Member Dixon?
Present. Member
Lavoie? Here. Member Hayes?
Here.
Vice Chair Burkett?
Here.
Chair Johns?
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, wonderful. And the report on the posting of the agenda, please.
The agenda for this meeting was posted for public review at the City Hall Bulletin Board on the west side of the Council Chambers and at the Planning Department counter in accordance with law.
All right, thank you very much. On the acceptance of the agenda, Flynn, I would like, if I could, to amend the agenda to add a discussion item.
And yes, we may do so. If you would like to go ahead and request that that item be added, we need a motion and a second.
Okay, so since I'm requesting the item be added, it should not probably be my...
You can go ahead and move.
Okay.
That would be appropriate,
then,
Mr.
Board,
Chair.
I'd like to motion that I add, or that we add, an additional discussion item to our list of discussion items under discussions 5.
And the topic?
Oh, the topic would be the HSPB's letter of 13 June 2017.
Let's see. And Mr. Lavoie was the second on that motion?
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. So we took a motion to add the discussion item. Now, do we need to accept the agenda as well?
Yes, if
Okay.
you would, please.
And so on a motion, please, to accept the agenda as amended.
Move to approve.
Linda Dixon? Second. And Mr. Lavoie? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you very much. Public comment. This time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Historic Site Preservation Board on agenda items and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Although the Historic Site Preservation Board honors your comments pursuant to the Brown Act, it generally cannot take any action on items not listed on the posted agenda. There will be 3 minutes assigned for each speaker. Testimony for public hearings will be taken at the time of the hearing. So, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a public hearing today. That is item 2A. If you are here to speak on that item, you'll have an opportunity during the public hearing. This public comment is for all other items or all other speakers who wish to address the board. Anybody in the audience wishing to, please come forward. Good morning, and please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Jim Franklin. I'm here representing the Palm Springs Regional Association of Realtors, and I apologize to Councilman Roberts for taking his seat, at least at this time. All right, I can see you're awake now, so we're going here.
That got our attention.
I'm here to talk about 2 items, and one of them is the moratorium on issuing building permits on properties built before 1969. And as you know, that's been going on for a couple of months, and the City Council just extended it for 4 months. We would like to urge you to move forward to end that moratorium, because it is starting to affect people who want to go out. Becky's here. She's going to talk about one particular client who do want to make changes or more than the 25% to their property. And currently, right now, there are 197 properties listed for sale in Palm Springs built before 1969. Now, many of those are have been redone, but there's some, like the one in the Mesa. It's on Crestview, that was the original illegal casino in Palm Springs. Now, is that historic? I don't know. But the place is in bad shape, and then there's a lot next door where part of a building has been built. So I'm sure whoever buys that, they're going to spend $2 million on it, are going to want to come in and redo the whole thing. So that's just kind of a couple of examples of where we're at with that. The other objection we have is that changing it from 1969 to 35 years. And my understanding is that then everything built 35 years ago, which would be 1984 basically, would fall under the Class 3. Right now, there are 440 properties for sale that fall under that 1984 year. So that's quite a few of them. And that includes the 197, so it's 440 total for that, out of about 700 homes for sale in Palm Springs. So that's about 63% of the properties. We sell about 2,000 properties a year, so roughly 1,200 properties that are sold are going to fall under Category 3 or the historical designation number 3. So the problem that we see is that then if someone needs to get a permit, they have to come to you. And so you figure, I think you even thought that'd be around 400 a year. So how can this board review 400 of those every year? And the 35 years is a floating number, so every year more and more properties fall under that. And I don't believe, or we don't believe, that properties built in early 80s, late 70s, that there's anything historical about them. Now, there's the Tokowitz property and that kind of thing. So anyhow, we're asking two things. One, that you work to get the moratorium done, and I know the City Council's looking forward to your recommendations, and I know I talked to Chairman Johns about this. It goes to the Planning Commission and then goes to the council so that we can get that issue solved. Because out of those 197, how many of you think that the realtors are aware of this and are going to inform their clients who are buying the property and then turn around and come down to get a permit to tear down an eyesore and then go, whoa, wait a minute, there's a moratorium, you can't get a permit? And so we're going to try to inform our members as best we can, but we were unaware of this until just a few weeks ago that this was happening. And again, I'll just repeat that we think 35 years is excessive. We should stick with the 1969 or maybe early 70 or something. Thank you, and now Becky Bowles is going to speak.
Jim, thank you. Good morning, and please introduce yourself.
Good morning, Gary. I'm Becky Bowles, and I'm here not just for the Palm Springs Association of Realtors. I'm speaking on behalf of all the property owners in Palm Springs. Here's what I did. I asked the local title company to tell me how many properties were built before 1969. So do you all know what that number is?
A lot.
6,417 properties. Homes built prior to 1984, 9,265 properties. So almost 9,300 properties would be affected on what I understand as the proposed regulation of that floating number of 35 years. So I'll just be the first to admit this is the first time I've been to this meeting, but I intend to attend more frequently and more often, because here's what happened. A client called me the second week of September. They were in process of doing a renovation in Sunmore. They had already done and gotten permits for the interior of the house and the renovations, which include plumbing, electrical, windows, doors, the whole thing was redone. That was completed. What they were trying to do was convert the carport to a garage, and they were stopped. So they were stopped and said, and received a letter saying that there's a moratorium on this project, and they couldn't go forward because the front lineal feet was more than 25% of the proposed changes. The proposed changes were more than 25%. Subsequently, we went back and talked about including the garden walls and so forth, so they were able to complete it. But here's the thing that I want to stress to this group, is it has a much larger economic impact than, well, Jim talked about 197. Well, my heavens, there's a whole lot more than 197. There is thousands of homes that would be affected. And here's what I want to make note, is we are at the beginning of a downturn. I don't know if you all know that, but it's true. Our it's changing. All along the coastal cities, it's already happened. It's beginning to happen here. So we're at the beginning of a downturn now, and if all of a sudden you continue this moratorium and make it more difficult for people to come in and improve the structures, that affects way more than just the property owner. That affects all the people, the ancillary services that go along with it. So it's the gardeners, the pool people, the housekeepers, the restaurants. Does that mean I'm at the end?
You can finish. Okay. No, Becky, you can finish your sentence.
So you get what I'm saying? It's a much bigger economic impact than just one remodel. And so I'm all about preservation. I want the Alexanders and the Meiselmans, Palmer Kreisels, those properties. It's really important that we preserve those. But you do a blanket sweep of this stuff, it's going to have a much bigger economic impact. Thank you.
All right, Becky, thank you very much. Anyone else in the audience? Anyone else in the audience wishing to address us? Please come forward. Good morning.
Hi there. My name is Stephen Price. I'm with on the board of the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation. I have some pamphlets to hand out. And I'm excited to be able to do this because it's non-contentious, it's fun, it's great, it's in support of your actions. And
Thanks, Ken.
I want to give you time to
All right,
have a
thank you.
look at it. There will be a test at the end. It's 8 pages. Again, I'm Stephen Price. I am, and those are extras for you to have and give out because I think you'll like it. I represent I'm on the board of PSPF, and we are happy. We're really thrilled with the letter that you forwarded to the mayor, naming the park in the downtown project for Nellie Kaufman. I mean, we've printed up this great brochure, or this great education piece that we had at our booth at Modernism Week. It got incredible reception, and everybody said it was a no-brainer. I don't know if there's anything else in the hopper for the name for the park, but it just seems to be, as everybody has acknowledged, one of those things that is, we've named parks for our great founding women, and it's in keeping with that. We had a meeting with City Council member Holstich, who has been on board with us, who's absolutely committed to this as well. We're really building momentum, and the letter helps us keep going with that. Eric Rosenau had a Valley Voice, and there have been multiple letters to the city. And our storyboards at Modernism Week in the back of the booth really were incredible, incredible draws. We are working to secure the Desert Inn gates for the property, but we are planning to commit to a historic marker. So there's something in the drawings that are being prepared now. And I just wanted to thank you again for your leadership on this, and we're behind you and very excited. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Price, excuse me, Linda?
aren't you giving a presentation this week on Nellie Kaufman? Is it the foundation?
I think it's the Historic Society,
The
actually.
Historic
That's
Society.
former
Will
Mayor
Kleindienst?
Kleindienst, yeah.
Yep.
At the Cultural Center on 7 o'clock on Thursday. Yes.
7 o'clock, and where is it being held?
At the Cultural Center at the Old Camelot Theater. I don't know how better to describe it.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
It's
Thank
actually
you.
at 6 o'clock, I believe.
6?
I believe, yeah,
Okay.
6,
They
yeah.
told me 7. Obviously, they don't want me to be there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else in the audience wishing to address the board this morning? Seeing none, we will close our public comment.
Mr. Chair, if I might just interject,
Please.
because we had a couple of comments relative to the moratorium and the proposed demolition ordinance that is going forward to City Council, I thought I might just announce to those members of the public who are here in attendance that the ordinance is tentatively going to be scheduled for City Council discussion on November the 28th. That will be a public hearing. All those who wish to comment on the proposed ordinance are invited to attend. I'll have confirmation on that later this week, but again, we are tentatively scheduling it for November the 28th.
Flynn, thank you. Dick, hold that thought just a second. Our actions of this board have been completed. There is
Correct.
no further action that this board will be taking on this
Correct.
action. So if the members of the audience clearly, as Flynn is instructing all of us, November the 28th is when the City Council's public hearing will take place. That's a good place to show up. So this was a good dress rehearsal for you all. All right, excellent. All right,
but
Flynn,
Ms.
thank you. I'm sorry, but I had called on Dick first, please. Sorry, Dick? I'm sorry.
I would like to recommend to staff, I think it's important if we could hold a meeting with the Board of Realtors. I totally understand, it's like when you know certain facts, but you don't have it all together. I think it would be obvious if we could sit down and explain, I think we could allay many of the concerns and that the board has. I've been a realtor. I understand where you're coming from, but it's not as bad as it looks on the surface. We have procedures put in place that I think when you understand them will make you feel much more comfortable. So I would just urge that we could try to have, even if it's an informal meeting, that we have something so that we, through our real estate community, which is extremely valuable to us, I totally get it, that we, I think there's, if we can explain certain things, I think you'll feel much more comfortable about what's being proposed. So I would ask staff if we can consider doing something. I'm not sure what it is, but I think it would be helpful. That's my recommendation.
Dick, thank you. Mr. Lavoy.
I'd recommend that they stick around for the discussion item 5F. When we're discussing this, there have been some changes recently that you might be happy to hear about.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much. Moving on to the agenda, item number 1 on the agenda is our consent calendar, the approval of the minutes. Ken,
Mr.
please.
Chair, I did not have a chance to get the minutes out, but they will be available for review and approval at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Item number 2 on our agenda is our public hearing this morning. This is item 2A. Linda? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Mr. Roberts, please, I'm sorry. And Mr. Roberts is here today to address the board on an update on La Plaza Theater. That's a discussion item number 5A. Thanks, Linda. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. Thanks for having me. So Gensler did a very in-depth analysis on what it will truly take to bring the La Plaza up to today's codes and standards, and as much as they have to be brought to today's standards, with the ultimate goal to have the La Plaza open again and be some sort of a theater. So this is sort of the final step that I know that we can take prior to actually coming up with a plan to reopen it. So you should see Gensler's presentation at some point. We can get Gensler, I'm sure, to come back. Are they going to come back Wednesday and do it?
I'm right here.
Oh, you're here? Oh, hi.
How are you?
Do you want to do it today?
Yeah.
Oh, see, I didn't know they were here to do it.
Oh.
Did you?
I just knew when they showed up.
Oh, okay.
So I figured if you want to do the preview and the primer, and then we can turn it over to
No,
them,
I
whatever you
think-
feel like. Whatever you feel like.
I'm sorry, I did not know you were here. So what I'm going to do is not say a lot, and I'm going to let you come to present. What I'm going to do in the interest of time is simply tell you that you're about to see the presentation by Gensler. And I'm really glad this gentleman's here. And he's done an amazing job with this. And he can answer pretty much all your questions about the restoration. We now have something that's not a guess. It's not a rough estimate. It's a very, very concrete and clear path to restoring the building. Spoiler alert, the estimate to restore this theater is, from Gensler's point of view, is $10 to $12 million. I personally believe we can do it for less. They're coming from a very conservative place, as we would want them to do. The next steps are up in the air. This is coming to council on Wednesday night. I want to present what we found for the council to see this entire presentation that you're about to see. And the idea is we have to now come up with a plan. We don't have a single nickel for this in terms of what the city has right now. There's not $1 budgeted beyond what we just budgeted to pay for this rather lengthy and rather expensive report. I think what I want to recommend to the city council is that we create a separate board for La Plaza made up of community members and people within boards and commissions to try to come up with a fundraising plan to find interest in the community. without real community help in this, it's just not going to happen. So La Plaza, I don't have to tell you, La Plaza's been sitting idle since it was last used by the Follies. And it always, and on the city council's plate and the city's agendas, it always falls to the bottom because it's very low in priority in terms of all the things that we have to deal with. I'm trying to keep it alive. So I'm trying to come up with ways to keep it alive, and this analysis was the next step. I think I'd like to have a public forum on this as well. Invite the community in as a whole. Let them know where we are, let them know what we want, what we're looking for, and see who comes up. I get calls from people. I get calls from celebrities. I get calls from former stage managers and people who ran theaters. And everybody wants to manage or run or help us be an enthusiastic cheerleader for the La Plaza. But the reality is we now need money and a plan. And a plan isn't even any good unless we have some real committed dollars for this. It'll just go back to where it was, which was idle and quiet. So my plan is to do a public forum on this. I'm open to ideas and anything beyond that. So I'd love for you to put this on your agenda, discuss it, send us your recommendations or send me your recommendations right now. But those are the next steps. I will stick around as long as I can after this. I have to be someplace in about 30 minutes. But if there's still time and you have questions specifically for me, I will try to be here for that, okay?
Jared, before you leave?
Yeah.
Tomorrow night's council meeting?
Yes.
You said Wednesday, tomorrow night?
Yes,
Okay,
Wednesday,
perfect.
tomorrow night.
So before you leave, Flynn, we don't have a Gensler presentation on our agenda today. So I'd like,
No, actually, you do under item 5A. They are in
Okay.
support of
All right.
Mayor Pro Tem Roberts on this
so
item.
again, in the interest of time, and with Mr. Roberts here, can we move that presentation to current now?
Yes, absolutely. Again, they are to
All right,
support
excellent. Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem.
So JR, please do stick around, and
I'll-
we'll
I'll
have
hang
the
about.
Gensler.
Yeah, in fact, I'll pull a chair up here and just be
Okay.
close and be available.
Okay, thank you.
JR.
Please, oh boy. All right. Good morning, and please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I am Peter Wilson with Gensler. No, I have it memorized pretty much.
Your name, that is?
No, the entire report, JR.
Excellent.
I specialize in designing theaters, and I was thrilled when we had the opportunity to come take a look at the Plaza Theater. It is a jewel. It is right in the heart of downtown. It is such a gorgeous, gorgeous space. So I will walk you through this presentation, and in the interest of time, I will try to make it quick. The report that I'm handing out is this entire presentation, so you can peruse it at your leisure. There is a narrative, but I'm just going to walk you through what's going on. So this is current conditions of the Plaza Theater. You know, it's been empty since 2014 when the Follies left after a really successful 23-year run. To give you an idea of the historical context, it's a smaller version of an atmospheric theater, you know, sort of the movie palace era of the 30s. Atmospheric theaters put you outside in a city-like setting with a beautiful night sky overhead. And just to compare, you know, here are some atmospheric theaters that have fallen into disrepair. So when you compare that to what you have at the Plaza, you're actually in really wonderful shape. So what we did, we found the original drawings on vellum from the Art Museum. And we had them photographed by the Huntington Library so that we could really delve into all of the details and see exactly what the original design intent was. And we took that into modern software, modeled the building, and sort of started thinking from there. And this is in collaboration with structural engineer, MEP, theatrical consultant, and historical consultant Robert Chattel, really guiding us. So these are plans of the proposed updates, and we'll get into the specifics of this. There's the balcony plan. The basement, I don't know if you know, originally was a mechanical room, and it has served as the dressing room space. It's not really designed for that, and that's a point of discussion for later on. And then here's a centerline section just showing what we're proposing for those side walls, the atmospheric walls. And looking at the proscenium. So we split the approach up into 6 major areas. The theater itself, the lobby and the front of house spaces, the stage and the wings, basement/dressing rooms, the exterior, and then the infrastructure. Infrastructure, not sexy, totally necessary. So within the theater, there's 8 main points that we wanted to make, and here's this fantastic photo from the 40s, you know, maybe 5, 10 years after the plaza originally opened. I love the mix of people who are here. I love seeing the seats. I love everything about this picture. And current state of the plaza. So, you know, there's basic stuff. The concrete floors need to be cleaned. New carpet is needed. The seats are in disrepair, as you can see with all those seat covers. So new seating with integrated aisle lights for safety. Here's the original drawings. The row widths are narrow. We're proposing to increase them to sort of modern standards. This is a frequent thing that happens in older theaters, that they were just designed for smaller people and different levels of comfort than what we're used to. We are proposing to take out the last 3 rows of the theater and increase the number of wheelchair accessible spaces. Seating at the front, the ramp to get down, that aisle ramp, is not technically accessible. You can do it, you know, if you have an usher who's helping out, that sort of thing. But we do think, you know, looking at the population, we want to make sure that there are an adequate number of seats for patrons in wheelchairs. And this is also taking into account sightlines, making sure that we have the best sightlines to the stage. Similar, the balcony is pretty much staying the same. We're just staggering some seats to get some better sightlines. There is no wheelchair access to the balcony. So we're getting the required number of seats for wheelchairs down at the orchestra level. The atmospheric sidewalls. You can see in the right-hand picture that there is some modern additions that have been made to the existing. And so what we would like to do is to go back, looking at those original drawings. It's frequently asymmetric. The 2 sides of the theater are different, because if you were outside in a city plaza, the buildings wouldn't look the same on each side. So we want to take that back to what these original designs were. We feel so lucky that someone preserved these drawings. They're gorgeous. They're absolutely gorgeous. The coved ceiling needs some updates. There was originally a star field effect, so it was like a starry night. We would love to see that brought back. And we need to integrate air conditioning, theatrical lighting, house lighting, speaker hang positions. So it's maintaining the historical design of what was there while adding in these theatrical accommodations. And there's the current state of the ceiling. You can see there are just holes that have been cut into it for the house lights. There is some theatrical lighting, not necessarily in the right positions. And so there are a few options for what we do with that ceiling. Part of that depends on acoustics, whether it's restoring the original plaster using an acoustic plaster or something else. And I think this, once we got to the point that we were doing this at our office and just imagining ourselves in this space, I just think this is kind of magical. You know, to have this kind of theater, beautiful atmospheric theater in the heart of downtown, it's, like I said, it's a jewel, and I really hope that we can restore it to its glory. So continuing to the front of house, lots of options for what's going on here. The concrete beams, notice that those concrete beams, the stenciling, the original stenciling is still there. It's beautiful. So we're proposing at this front of house space that's currently exterior, that we actually infill those 3 archways with a modern glass doorway, so we capture some more interior space. The lobby is quite small. It would be fine as a movie theater. It was designed as a movie theater, but for live performance, you want to have more space so you can have people mingling before the show and people mingling during intermission. So we would be capturing this outdoor space by infilling those archways with glass. And otherwise, it's maintaining, it's preserving what's there, you know, restoring those light fixtures, maintaining the Saltillo tile. Here's the interior space. Again, light fixtures. We need new carpet. We would like to take what was that sound mixing position at number 5 and add a central bar to the lobby so that there's a focus. There's a place for people to mingle, and it's also an opportunity for food and beverage sales, merchandise sales, stuff that can bring tenants in and provide an additional revenue stream. And so here's an idea of what that space could look like in a cutaway section. So over at the left-hand side, we have those modern glass doors to enclose that outdoor space. We're maintaining the stenciled concrete beams, where we're storing the light fixtures, adding a new woven carpet, really capturing more interior space for the lobby while preserving the historical intent, making it clear that we're adding those doors in and that they're modern. Current state of the restrooms, they are old. They just need to be updated. Sound and light locks. There are different standards today for that vestibule, sort of the space in between the lobby and the theater. Used to be that one door was fine. Now people typically want 2 doors with some acoustic absorption in there. So at all of the sound and light locks, we would be looking to increase the sort of performance standards to today's standards. And that would be adding a second set of doors at the main sound and light locks coming in from the lobby, adding some absorption to those spaces as well. And here are those long corridor sound and light locks along either side of the theater. Number 9, this is a quirky thing. The theater is actually landlocked. It does not have direct access to the street. It has an easement at the front for the courtyard. It has an easement in the back for an alley that's used for loading. And number 9, this is a stairway from an adjacent building that's coming into the building. We don't know when it was added in. It's unusual to have access between one person's property and the city's property like this. So we are recommending that this would be removed. Moving on to the stage, here's another photograph from the 40s, and you can see that original concrete proscenium stenciled much like the lobby and the front of house space. And here's the current state of the proscenium. It was a false, just plaster and studs proscenium added in front of the concrete proscenium. And one of the great things that we found is that that original proscenium is still there. It's still pristine. The stenciling is still there. So we were proposing to remove the false proscenium and expose the original, maintain that. The stage edge has been changed. So we'd like to go back to the original, have some footlights to maintain that vaudeville era feel, and provide stairs going up to the stage. And then technically, theatrically, adding a pipe grid over the stage for lighting, scenery, speakers, and some additional acoustic performance from those doors and the wings that are going to the exterior, just to make sure you don't hear sounds from outside on the stage. Dressing rooms. This is one of the least sexy and most complicated parts of the project, because as they stand right now, the stairway is very steep going down to the dressing rooms. There's no accessible way to get down there, and we would have to include some sort of wheelchair access. And you do have to go through this audience corridor to get up to the stage. So none of those are really functioning the way a theater should function, and it really limits the kind of acts that could come in here. Current state of the dressing rooms. How the Follies made it work. When I saw these dressing rooms, I was just astonished, knowing the scale of what they put on the stage to find that this was the space they had to work with. Really amazing, and really, Judy and Mickey, let's put on a show, let's make it work. And that is fine and good, and I would love to see even better quality so we can get a wide variety of acts coming in. Here is that easement, that rear alley, which had been used as storage for restaurants in the area. There's the scaffolding there. This is how sets get loaded into the stage. So there are multiple options for how to deal with the dressing rooms. If we want to use the basement space, you can see the area that's hatched in with diagonal. That has not yet been excavated. So we could maintain the dressing rooms, update the fixtures, but maintain the space as is, and add an accessible lift to get a performer down to the dressing rooms. We could improve the stairway access up to the stage by shifting the stairs around a little bit, adding a door so that a performer doesn't have to walk into an audience area to get up to the stage. We could excavate that area that is currently unexcavated, so expand the dressing rooms and add a spiral stair to get up to that side of the stage. There are lots of options for what we could do here, but thinking sort of outside the box, the blue area is that currently exterior alley that there's an easement. If we covered over that, that would provide some additional backstage space. You could potentially get an accessible dressing room at that level. So that would mean that you wouldn't have to put in a lift and reduce the wing space. And I think the most out-of-the-box idea is literally outside of the Plaza Theater entirely. This green zone is the existing police downtown experience office that's leased by the city. If we took over part of that building for dressing rooms, potentially offices, potentially rehearsal space, it would allow the kind of programming that you have at the theater to expand without requiring complicated construction like excavating the basement further. So it's not inside the theater, but it is right there, and it would be a tremendous use of the space. Exterior is fairly straightforward. There's some deferred maintenance. Paint would need to be refreshed. Need to check on the roofing, but there's no leaks. Historically, there are these, this is on the south side, there are these plywood arched zones. We don't know what's behind them. They're plywood on both sides, both interior and exterior. We think there may be like a stained glass window behind it, but it's not in the original drawings. So we're actually looking forward to seeing what that is and what we can do with it. And finally, infrastructure. It doesn't have its own page in this presentation because it's not sexy, it's not a pretty picture, but it is substantial. It is roughly half the cost of the renovation. Upgrading the mechanical and upgrading the electrical, that's in the range of $5 million. And it's just the mechanical and electrical in the building, 25, 30 years old, it's sort of at the end of its useful life, especially with current codes. So it's not a sexy thing to get a donor for, but it is something that needs to happen to bring the theater up to current standards. And from then, I will let you peruse through the report at your leisure. Included in the binder are the historical report, structural, MEP, everything you could want to see about the theater. But I think the point is, architecturally, we love it. I don't want to change it. I don't want to do adaptive reuse. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous theater, and it just needs some love, and I want to see it come back to life.
Peter, does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, it does.
I think there's going to be some questions, and I'd like to ask the first one. After the renovation is complete, what is the seat count? What would the seat count be after you've adjusted seating and all?
Roughly 650, 670. It's 700 as it currently stands.
Okay, so about 650 seats. Okay, thanks. Board, any other questions of Peter and/or JR while they're, Todd, please.
You mentioned replacing the seats. Would you keep the ends of the seats, or would you?
They are not consistent. If they were consistent and if they were original, we would.
Oh, they aren't?
But they are not the original. Now, looking at that photo from the 40s that was at the beginning of the presentation, you can see what the original seating standards were. I've worked with many different seating companies, and it's actually, we could have them recreate the original based on that photograph.
Okay.
And that might be something we would want to pursue.
Great, thanks.
Let's start with Vincent, please.
I wonder if we can hear from Robert Chattel as well as a historic consultant, especially the Secretary of Interior findings based on your plan set, how that, in
Chattel.
what stage was.
Peter, wait 1 second before we make this switch over here. All right, I take that, yes, but did you have a question of Peter?
I did, yes.
Please.
Peter, what other theaters have you renovated?
So, renovated historic buildings, I worked on, not a theater, but in Los Angeles, the new Museum for the Motion Picture Academy, co-designed with Renzo Piano. It's a historic department store. It was a May company from 1939. So I worked on the historic portion of that, as well as the large premiere theater there. Working on a theater for the Directors Guild now. Not historic, it's 1989, but it has its own challenges. Most of my work has been ground-up theaters. So a performing arts center in Orlando that's a 2,700-seat theater, a 300-seat theater, a 1,600-seat opera house and concert hall. A theater for the Television Academy that's 600 seats. A theater on a cruise ship for Royal Caribbean that's about 600 seats. And there's now 3 of those ships floating around, which is kind of crazy. Yeah, so I love ground-up buildings and I love historic buildings both. It just happens that a lot of my experience has been with ground-up buildings.
And the May Company building in LA.
Mm-hmm.
Who funded that project?
The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences is the client. And so people like David Geffen and Steven Spielberg gave tons of money for that project. The development director, Bill, oh, I can see his face and I cannot remember his last name, and he's now at the Brooklyn Academy of Music.
So it was mostly privately funded
Yes.
by individuals? I mean, the Academy and then
Yes,
a step further
it is not a
was-
publicly owned project at all. The Academy is leasing that site from the County Museum of Art for 99 years for $1.
And do you know, are they creating an endowment? Who is going to fund renovations and upkeep and everything? And
There is an endowment that is part of that. The money that was raised is both for construction, for an endowment, and for a curator, I believe, as well. So, I mean, the Academy has means far beyond what I'm used to working with.
okay.
But thinking about this, the Orlando project that I did was a nonprofit board that was created to create this performing arts center, and it is city money, county money, state money, private money. So really complicated, and it all comes down to who's on the board, who the movers and shakers are, how you find those connections, and how you really get people excited about the project.
Thank you.
Okay, so Peter, why don't you stay right there? Any other questions of Peter right now? We're going to have, Peter's not leaving. Dick, go ahead.
Yeah. When we, it's for Peter and JR in a way, when we had our subcommittee meetings on the Plaza Theater, one of the things that we talked about were venues and how's the theater going to be used? Because the venue often drives, what has to happen, behind the scenes and the fly space and all that kind of thing. So with going into this project at this point and not having that totally defined, is there something that is there a particular venue that you are recommending, and based upon your background with performing arts, that this theater is the highest and best purpose would be as far as venue's concerned?
Do you mean for type of performances that would happen there?
Right.
So designed as a movie theater of that era,
Right.
it's more of a shoebox space. It's long, it's narrow. If you were designing a 650-seat theater nowadays, it wouldn't look quite like this.
Right.
Because we are landlocked, because literally, there are buildings butting right up against the stage, right up against the wings, there's not a lot that we could do in terms of expanding. If I had my druthers, if this were not surrounded by other buildings, I might make suggestions about expanding the fly space up.
Right.
So that you could have scenery that flies in and out. Expanding the wing space, but none of those things can happen. Looking at this, I think there's so many opportunities. I mean, I came out of a scenic design background, theater scenic design. So I could imagine plays being staged here. I could imagine film festivals using the space. I could imagine cabaret performances, the Gay Men's Chorus. I used to sing with the GMCLA out in Los Angeles and Boston Gay Men's Chorus. Different community groups. I think there are people who can imagine how to use this space and not look at the wings and the fly loft as limitations, but look at the theater itself as a huge opportunity for them. I think in how that board is set up and whoever would be directing the theater, the executive director of the theater, programming, it's all about how to bring in a variety of different acts, and the theater can support a large variety of acts.
Well, that's encouraging, because I know that's one of the things we were really sort of struggling with during those subcommittee meetings. And one other thing, you know, there's in the basement under the La Plaza Theater, there are a lot of props that are still there, or at least they were, from the Follies. I don't know if that has any, you know, something you might want to consider or not in integrating in any way, but some of them were really quite interesting. So I really appreciate, I can tell you're passionate, you're about the whole thing, you're really into this project.
Oh, I'm in love with this space.
Yeah, I can
really
tell.
am.
Good.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bill, did you have something? Okay. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Robert Chattel, and
Okay.
I'm a historic preservation consultant, and we've been working closely with Gensler in preparing the study. So first of all, I totally agree, and I would encourage that the space be designed and fitted out to be as flexible as possible, given its limitations, but also to allow for a wide variety of uses. So our report is included in this. I just wanted to go to the significant space plans. This is something that we do typically as part of a historic structure report to identify primary, secondary, and tertiary spaces. So here, significant contributing and non-contributing. Red is the identification of a primary significant space. So the auditorium, the lobby and foyer, and the stage are all identified as primary significant space. The passageways on either side are identified as contributing, with some greater flexibility in terms of how they get adapted to either expanded or other uses. And the green areas are the spaces where they've already been altered. That's usually the area of a building that's ripe for future alterations. So our report was principally written to guide the Gensler team to come up with a plan that would feasibly reuse the building in a manner that causes the least amount of intervention, to use a light touch. So that's a summary. I can go into more
All
detail.
right, excellent. Any other questions of Peter and or Robert or JR at this time? Jared, do you have anything in summation?
So I'm sure you're as excited as I am by the things that we've learned. And I certainly learned a lot of new things about the theater. I was particularly excited about the proscenium. I was going through my own notes and realized I had a historic picture that actually showed that proscenium. I don't even know if you've seen this yet, Peter, or if it's one of the photographs is in there. But again, with respect to Dick's question about venue or use, there's going to be politics in that. In that, whoever brings the money is going to help drive what this becomes. That's just kind of the way it is, unless one of us wins the lottery and wants to just restore it as the theater it was. The only real interest I've gotten, and I've been talking to a lot of people about this, is from specific users who then want to specifically control how it gets restored, because they're going to show up with a lot of money. So my goal is that we don't let a specific user drive it, and that we somehow find the money in the community or outside of the community to restore it as it was, keeping it extremely flexible. I know these guys are prepared to jump on that. And so that's the ultimate goal. So getting from there to there is a gigantic leap. It's going to take, yes, I'm going to say it, it's going to take a village to get, and most importantly, I'm going to need your help to keep it on the map. So I'll be on the city council for another year. This is one of the few things that I would probably stay committed to following through on, because this was one of my original goals when I joined the city council. So, and I have experience in raising money and dealing with old buildings. So, but we need to have a very solid plan within the next year on how to move forward on this, because then it will be outside of my control anymore, and it will be left in the hands of others.
JR, you mentioned forming a new board or a new board or
Well,
commission?
a new expanded board of trustees of people, frankly, people who can make a difference here. People who can bring money, people who can bring resources, people who are willing to put in tremendous energy, which is what it's going to take to move this forward. And I've got some people in mind for that, but I think I wouldn't even consider that until we, again, have this public forum. I think that's the next step. If you all have other ideas, please forward them to me. But everything that we've done up to now has been great. It's taken us to what I think is the last place we can go before we jump off now to actually doing the job.
Linda?
Have you, you mentioned specific people who want specific programs. Have they seen this presentation?
No, this presentation's very, very new. I don't know, did Suzanne see it? I don't even remember. I don't think any of our end users have seen it. It's very fresh. This is, we haven't had this for very long. So prior to this, there was a study done that said it would cost about half of this to restore the theater. And that's what most people were told when they came to see us. And again, this is doing this at Gensler's level, which would be kind of the ultimate dream. We can probably do most of the restoration and get this back open for probably quite a bit less than that. Again, what it's really going to be is getting that financial ball rolling. And Peter, I want to contact you. We haven't had a chance to talk offline yet, but I want to sit down and talk to you about that and pick your brain on that as well.
Linda, again?
And did you say it's in front of council tomorrow?
Yes, coming before council simply to update them
Okay.
and get their input. And so you're getting a preview of what I'm going to recommend as subcommittee, which is to do a public forum and then take their ideas and staff ideas as well. I know they're all as excited as I am, right, Ken? Hi, Ken.
Ken Flynn, we already have a subcommittee. The HSPB does have a subcommittee, and it's Dick and Bill?
Mm-hmm.
And Vincent. Okay, good. So that should stay in place.
Yeah, that was the first subcommittee I wanted to create, just to kind of get us to this point. So we're now beyond this point. We're now ready for a whole new level. But yeah, we will always have some group of you that are interested involved in this next part of it. So again, unless you have a different and better idea than a public forum, that's going to be my recommendation. And if you do, by the way, I've got to leave now, but if you discuss this and you have some other ideas, call me or contact me today, because I'll be happy to bring those ideas to the council as well, okay?
Okay. JR, just hold any other questions of our presentation, our presenters this morning? Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much. JR, thank you. Robert, Peter, thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
All righty, thank you very much. Now, we will move to our item number 2 on the agenda. This is our public hearing. Item 2A, Peter Lafort and Sally Julian, owners, requesting Class 1 historic designation of the John and Bessie Macy residence located at 1577 South Kaye Marcus. Staff report, please.
Read that all just a little bit slower, Gary. I'm just about ready for you.
Okay, no problem.
Bear with me just a moment, please. Okay. So the application before you is an application by the owner of 1577 South Kaye Marcus, seeking Class 1 Historic Site designation. The property, as you see in your staff report, is the result of the design by Hugh Captor. And this was a home that was done fairly early in Captor's career. The building is done in a typical mid-century modern post and beam style construction. The home was designed and built in about 1960, and the homeowner has had the good fortune to actually reach out to Mr. Captor, who actually had the original blueprints for the project. So they've been able, and those were provided in the report that was provided to you a couple of months ago. What it reveals is that the home has a rather high degree of integrity. There's been very little adverse modifications done to it. It still retains the original floor plan. The current owners have done a series of upgrades to the building, including installing more energy-efficient windows. All of the window work has been done working within the existing openings in the fenestration that the building had originally. When you go onto the back of the building, which those of you that visited it saw the arrangement and the placement of doors and fixed panels and the mullion arrangements on everything in the back of the house is consistent with what was in the original drawings by Mr. Capter. In your staff report, you'll find that, I just have to reference this a quick second, but we've identified those elements that we believe are the defining historic characteristics. Those show up on your staff report in page 9. And the analysis of the project, the applicant is basically asserting that the home meets the definition of a historic site based on its association with an architect of significance, and that it is embodying the distinctive characteristics of the mid-century modern period in the post and beam style. On page 6 of your report and going forward, there's some analysis of the project's integrity. On page 7 at the top, you'll note there's a photo in which I've added an arrow showing the leading wall, which in this particular image that we're looking at, let me see if I can get this further down, shows up. Maybe I'm not going to have a picture of that, I guess. But on the far north edge of this front facade, as you see on your page 7 of the report, there have been some concrete block added on top of a existing and original slump stone block wall. And our recommendation would be that removal of that addition would improve the integrity of the project. Non-contributing elements are identified on page 8 of your staff report. And in general, we believe this is a candidate site that would be potentially eligible as a Class 1 historic site. And as you've seen in the staff report, it's our recommendation that this board make a recommendation to the City Council recommending Class 1 designation of it. I haven't had a chance to turn around here. Is the applicant in the audience?
Yes.
Beautiful. And so staff and the applicant are available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ken. Before calling the applicant forward, any questions of staff at this point?
Just one.
Please?
Your only recommendation is to remove the slump stone addition?
That's the item that we saw, particularly from the street, that was most impacting. There are other things that are on the home, as you've noted in the report, that are non-original. We did not feel that they were significant enough to really seriously impair the integrity. They may be things that the owner over time may want to consider revising or changing, but they were not to the degree of quote-unquote issue that slump stone wall had for us.
That you would make a recommendation?
Yeah.
But
Okay,
for the
thank you.
record, you're not recommending the removal of the slump stone wall. You're requesting the addition to the slump stone wall, which is concrete block.
That's correct. We're simply saying that that's an item that we recognize
Yeah.
is not original, and it's noticeable when you view this house. We would not recommend it as a condition of Class 1 designation. We would recommend that the owner, in moving forward with this, if they start doing capital improvements, that would be one that they would consider.
Okay. Would the applicant like to come forward, please? Good morning, and if you'll introduce yourself as you sit down, please, into the microphone.
Yep. I'm Sally Julian. I'm the homeowner, or one of the homeowners of the property in question.
Okay. Any questions of the applicant? Okay. Please, Todd.
No, go ahead.
Bill?
Are you responsible for this restoration?
Yes. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That's a good thing.
Okay.
Todd?
I have a question why you decided to whitewash the house versus returning it to its more authentic color scheme.
So when we purchased the house, we were working with one of the two historic groups, and I can't honestly remember which one because of all the initials. And we didn't know it was Hugh Capter. We were not able to find that out until the plan had been probably 90% executed. So we didn't have the original plans to refer back to, so that's part of it. But the other part of it is that, you know, in Hugh's style, his typical sort of bringing in the organic, and you know, it had originally saltillo tiles, which had been painted and saw cut, and so we kind of assumed those were original. They would have had to be completely redone, and we felt like at that point we would make it more into the taste that we were looking to. But you know, again, we didn't. I think if we had known it was a Hugh Captor, we probably would have looked at making some different decisions at that point, but we didn't, and so we went with what we thought was, you know, in keeping with the period of the house.
Ms. Julian, you actually worked with John Gilmer, did you not, on the restoration of the property?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, because John is a former chair of
Yeah.
this Historic Site Preservation
Yeah, he
Board.
helped us with some of the drawings on the kitchen and also some of the drawings for the landscaping in the backyard.
Okay. Any other please, Vincent?
I wonder if the case report could address the original owners, the Macy's, and also the builder. There's not much narrative about their association with the building as the original owners and the developer who did the project.
There's not a lot of information that I was able to find about them, and again, I'm not a professional researcher by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, given the research that I did, Werner Hogback was a spec builder here as early as the 40s that I could find a reference to, and I'm surmising that because he and his wife lived way out on Snow Creek Road, way up north, and that was their address throughout the research that I did, and he purchased many lots throughout the area. You know, there was a couple in Rancho Mirage that I found, and here and there, so he was clearly buying lots and building individual homes, obviously not developments. And this was one of them. And then the Macy's are incredibly hard to research by virtue of the fact that their last name is Macy. So you get Macy's department store. So I just was unable to really find anything much about them aside from the fact that they lived in the home until the mid-'80s, until their death.
Ms. Julian, is the house currently listed for sale?
Yes.
And what is the status of that now? Just listed for sale?
Yes.
Are you informing potential buyers of
Yes.
your intention to designate this house as a
Yes.
historic site?
Yes. For me, I'm a control freak, and I don't want to sell this house to someone who will do anything to it that wouldn't be in keeping with, you know, what I feel like it should be. And so I felt like adding historic, telling people that it's about to be hopefully listed as historic, would be a way to find a buyer who will love and care for it in its current state in the way that we did. So.
Okay. Any other questions of Ms. Julian? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Board.
Comments, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Lavoy? Yeah, your mic's-
I greatly appreciate the abbreviated report to start with. All the information one needs is here. I agree with the recommendation for the removal of the concrete block. It is the only wart remaining on this building.
Can I address that?
No, not quite. You know, I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. Give me a minute. I saw this on a Realtor's open house. I was just tooling around the neighborhood, as I often do, and so I went, whoa, I have to see this one. I would like to commend the design team and the owner for a very sensitive restoration and update. I look for ideas, and I am so tired of seeing faux wood tile floors and gray paint and well, a few other things. I walked to this, and I had to ask, is this the original floor? And the Realtor was upfront with, no, that there was Saltillo tile. This is new. And one of the first things they told me was, we are up for nomination. And I said, oh, good. And it was beautifully done, and it wasn't an inexpensive addition or update because of how they did the windows. They did them like you're supposed to do them. And at what was probably huge expense, there is no trim on the windows, particularly as it goes through the ceiling. And that plane going through is the most amazing piece of mid-century modern that we seem incapable of doing anymore. So I would wholeheartedly support this nomination, and not much more to say. Thank you for great work.
Todd, please.
Well, okay. I gotta say, I am taking sort of a different approach. I am not able to support this primarily because of how it's painted. I think that whitewashed houses with orange doors have quickly become the lowest common denominator in Palm Springs. And it's not remotely in keeping with the authenticity of the house. I think that the house, from a structural standpoint, maintains or still holds a great deal of integrity, but I think the painting completely diminishes the authenticity of the house. And I think if, so I, in wanting to make sure that this would not have been how the house was painted when it was built, I did reach out to our local hue captor expert, who did tell me, in fact, that this most likely would have been painted in earth tones. Those square medallions on the front that look like they're caked with 20 layers of paint most likely are redwood and would have been exposed wood. The beams would have been painted in a contrasting cut color, and there most likely would have been some green or blue complementary color either on the wood, the doors, the trim, or something. That it certainly would not have been whitewashed and it wouldn't have an orange door. So my concern is this board made the owner of the Town and Country go to great lengths to make sure that that center was painted authentically with a color scheme that was appropriate and authentic and recreated the original color palette of that house. And I think we moved down a very slippery slope if we allow the designation of a house that, on the one hand, the Town and Country was not allowed to do anything other than an authentic recreation of its color palette, and this house is allowed to whitewash its authenticity away. I think that, I personally certainly want that block wall taken off the front, but I think it's, people are going to drive by this house as it is, and if they see that plaque in front, they're going to say, oh, wow, Hugh was the first person to whitewash a house and put an orange door on it, which is not true. That's not what he did. And I think, thankfully, the structure is there, but I think, we need to perhaps require the owner, if they do indeed want the designation, to return some authenticity to the color palette of the house. And that's my 2 cents.
Todd, thank you. Anyone else? Vincent?
Well, only a comment that paint is reversible, and a future owner could bring it back more in conformance to its original colors and context. So I'm not as much bothered about that as you are.
To Todd's point, but we're designating the house with this paint job, so there's very little incentive to a future owner, I would think, to do any restoration, given that this is the house that got designated with this paint palette, color palette. Linda, thoughts?
Question of staff. Could something be put into the conditions that requires restoration of the original paint palette?
It could be put in. It could be put in the form of a recommendation. I don't think that the city can force a building owner to paint it in a particular color. I would suggest that if the color issue is an important thing to this board, that you make your recommendation with the condition
Based
that
on-
the owner is recommended or encouraged to discover the original paint colors, and when the next paint cycle happens in the house, that they take it back to those original colors.
And would that direction, since the house is up for sale, would that direction be put in the sales agreement that?
No,
So
this
it
would be,
could-
this would
It
be.
could never happen. She could sell it tomorrow and it could stay white and be historic if it's approved, and that's that.
Yes, it would go in the form of a recommendation on the resolution. The resolution does get recorded against the title of the home, so subsequent owners would certainly see that information, and they would see the resolution with the board's recommendations.
But they wouldn't have to do anything about it.
They wouldn't have to, no. It's not uncommon. Most of the properties that you have seen as a board and that this board historically has seen are not the original colors. So it's good that the board is raising its awareness of that aspect, and you've also raised awareness of landscapes and things like that. So I think it's important to look at these kinds of things in terms of integrity. I think that when you evaluate whether this paint job materially impairs this site to the extent that it destroys the character-defining features of the home that make it historic, that would be the determination that would begin to push it to say that it doesn't meet the definition of a historic site, because its integrity would be so far compromised that it would impair its historic significance. I don't think that's the case in this particular example, but that's the kind of thing that you could evaluate as you look at any one of these Class 1 nominations.
Thank you.
Todd?
So, yeah, but we are not, the owner of this house is asking us to do something, and so we are not making them do anything. So they can decide not to designate this house, leave the house the way it is, and everybody's same as they are right now. They are asking us to make this house one of the 115 most special buildings in all of Palm Springs, and we have tens of thousands of buildings in the city of Palm Springs. And in my opinion, because of how this house is painted, it does not elevate this house to the standing of being one of the most special 115 houses in all of Palm Springs. That's and I think we absolutely are in a place where we can say, if you want this designated as a Class 1 house, you have to return this house to a more appropriate color palette. Then they can elect to not do that and not accept that condition and leave the house the way it is. However, if they want that special condition and designation placed on this property, there are certain requisites that I think need to happen, and that's why I think color is one of those requisites. And I'm going to read, so I went through and also read most of the Secretary of the Interior standards with respect to color and finish and preservation under the section that deals with preservation. What's not recommended, and I quote, changing the type of finish, coating, or historic color. So that's in direct contrast to what the Secretary of the Interior standards ask for. And so I just, my concern is, and again, I go back to the Town and Country. So what happens if the owner of the Town and Country comes back to us and says, hey, you know, this would be better right now if it were all white with orange doors? That argument that they're gonna have, well, you just allowed that to happen on another Class 1 house, or so why can't you allow this on ours? I think it really sets a bad precedent that I personally am very concerned about.
All right, thank you, Todd. Anything else? Vincent? I'm sorry.
That's okay.
On page 8 of 9, basically a non-contributory feature could be the whitewash house is not original to the site, and therefore HSPB highly recommends reversing the colors to more historic colors, essentially. And then somehow transferring that to the resolution that gets adopted. That would be the legal record. So it would be a strong recommendation to reverse the color scheme for the house.
Okay, thank you, Vincent.
Mr. Chair?
I think Mr. Lavoie is next. Jeff, please.
Todd brings up a good point. The characteristics of Mr. Kapter's work were, you know, a reference to the Adobe architecture more in a more romantic way than the other modernists had done. And so the color scheme of a building is very important. And it's how we perceive the building. And looking at this white building, it's pretty stunning. But to think of those slump stone walls in an earth tone and the beams in dark wood, it would be a very, very different building. And so, I mean, since the significance of this building is as it's a work of a certain architect in a certain period of his work, and we're saying it has integrity, the fact that it's white doesn't mean it doesn't have the integrity that rises to a certain level of a class 1. So in this, I mean, everything else to me is quite right, but Todd, I support Todd's point of view that perhaps it should be returned to its original colors to be a class 1.
Mr. Chair?
Please, Linda.
I have a question of Ms. Julian.
Ms. Julian, please come back now. Thank you.
I don't know why I ran away.
Upon hearing the discussion up here, there is concern for the color. Would you be willing to restore the color on the house as we stand right now?
Probably not, no.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Dick?
Yes, I have a question.
Please.
Ms. Julian, too. It's my understanding that Mr. Kapter has visited the house.
Yes.
And you discussed it with him.
Yes.
Did he make any mention about the paint color? Or?
No. He said he really enjoyed it. He took a lot of notes. He was working on the little Tuscany houses at the time, which I think he referenced from this home with the raised blocks,
right.
And which was kind of interesting to see. Based on the plans, those were not redwood. They were like a plaster stucco material. But, you know, I think that's neither here nor there because I'm sure they were a much more organic color, to your point. But, I mean, he said he really liked it. We had a discussion about, you know, architecture evolving and how, you know, the materials that we use that he would now consider using because they're available and they weren't available when he was working, that kind of thing. But no, he made no other comment about the white specifically.
Knowing that he's very straightforward, I would think if he would have been very concerned about it, he would probably have made mention to you that
Yes.
You should probably
Yes.
repaint it.
Yeah.
He's not bashful.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Can I know it's not a specific question, but it's been raised a few times. Can I address the block wall?
Please.
The reason we did not remove, because that was one of the first things that I noticed about the house as well, and the reason we did not remove the square blocks on top of the slump stone is because of the pool. So for code, you have to have a certain height of fence around the entire property. And so that's why someone added it. They did a horribly crappy job of it. But if we take it down, we have to put something else up, and we couldn't get the slump block. And there was really nothing else that we could come up with that we thought would be, you know, I mean, I could think of a lot of things that would be an improvement, but not a significant enough improvement for the cost that it was going to be to get it to code for the city because of the pool. So that's why that is still there, FYI.
I have a question of staff. Ken, most likely you. To your knowledge, has the HSPB denied a Class 1 designation of a single-family private residence primarily based on its color palette?
Not that I can recall.
Yeah. Again, I'm kind of waffling because Todd's, I think, points are very, very well made about the current paint of the Town and Country Center, how this board insisted upon and required a more authentic color, but it was already designated as a historic site when the paint came to us. So we had a Class 1 historic site that was undergoing a repaint, and so we had some teeth in requiring that we kind of don't have here. I believe this is sort of a new situation. You know, I know the house well, have driven by it 100 times, have been to it on a home tour, etc. I certainly respect it and admire it and like it, but it doesn't stand out. It isn't as authentic as it would have been if it still retained some of its original integrity. I think that would add a level of uniqueness and specialness to it. So I'm personally in a quandary on this. It'll be interesting to hear what kind of emotion comes forward in the next couple of minutes. Any other questions of Ms. Julian while she's at the table? All right, thank you again very much for coming this morning, please. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions of staff, please?
Mr. Chair, just procedurally, this is a public hearing item, and so we have had the applicant come up and speak under public
Understood, yes.
public hearing. You may want to invite anybody else in the room if they wish to speak during public comment to do so, and if you hear no others, you may close the public comment.
Yes.
And then move to any actions the board wishes to take.
And Ken, thank you for always keeping me, always keeping me on track. Yes, and indeed, this is a public hearing. We have heard from the applicant. Anyone else in the audience this morning wishing to address the board on this public hearing item? All righty, seeing none, then we will close the public hearing. Thank you. Now,
Mr. Chair.
Discussion, please.
In the lease, the color, the present white paint color should be listed as a non-contributing element.
That can be done.
That's the easiest thing to do. Going on to discussion item 5F, there is a tier coming forward for Class 2 historic site that for sites that lack a certain degree of integrity. And that may be where this might fall.
Mm-hmm.
Just speaking to Mr. Lavoie's comment, as he's indicated that we are considering as part of the changes to our preservation ordinance and demolition procedures, the idea of creating a second tier of designation, the structures of merit. And this is something that might fall under that category should that ordinance be approved. One of the other things I was just discussing with Mr. Lyon is under the Mills Act contract, if a subsequent owner were to apply for a Mills Act contract, the purpose of the contract is, of course, to maintain and restore structures of historic significance. One of the ideas I had is perhaps as a condition of approval, if they are to submit a Mills Act contract, that they would then be required to return it to its original color scheme under the Mills Act contract.
Linda?
So the Mills Act contract would be the new owner is submitting for tax benefits? And so if they submitted their application, then they would see that before they could be eligible for any tax credits, they have to restore the paint, the outside to
Yeah,
its
they would
original
be required to do
intent.
that as a condition of the approval of the Mills Act contract, correct? And so what you could do as a board is recommend that we include a condition of approval stating that should a subsequent owner apply for a Mills Act contract, as part of that contract, the owner will be required to restore it to its original paint scheme.
Well, in a room full of realtors, but we see a significant disclosure there because anyone purchasing a $1 million-plus house that has Class 1 historic designation on it is going to be motivated by Mills Act tax benefits. And it should not be assumed that these benefits will then be automatically bestowed on this house with this condition applied. So, can of worms?
Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
In a certain other city, it is required in order to obtain a Mills Act contract that you provide a work list with a budget equal to the amount of the tax deduction. Benefit. And it can be for everything from outside, inside, plumbing, we do the electrical, we do the foundation, anything that makes it more habitable and more usable as an historic resource. And we, as a commission up there, do approve those almost every meeting.
Okay. I'd ask, Ken, hold that thought, please. Sure. Todd, how would you feel about this condition on the Mills Act as being the avenue to get this back to a natural palette?
Well, so I think the more appropriate action would be to hold off and wait and see what happens with the Class 2, because I'm not able to approve this house in its current state. And I think given that we have the potential for it being a more appropriate Class 2 coming down the pike very shortly, there's also an argument to be made to hold off and do nothing right now and wait and see what the possibility is for having this designated Class 2. I think the issue with hoping that they change this if they get a Mills Act, there's no mandate that they get a Mills Act. And so all that's going to happen is this house in perpetuity could stay exactly the way it looks, and it's still designated a Class 1 historic site. And people for the next 10 to 20 to 50 years could drive by this White House with an orange door and assume that that's the appropriate color palette for this house. The requisite that if they apply for a Mills Act contract, that's a big if. There's no guarantee that they're going to do that, I guess, is my concern with designating this Class 1 right now, today, given its current state.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, Ken had it. Please, Ken.
No, I was just going to offer a clarification on the way that the kind of the working parts on a Mills Act contract work. And Bill touched on it, when a Mills Act contract is executed with the city and a property owner, we look at the issues that are in the resolution. If you think of things like Sandcliff, for example, as a historic district, there was lots of conduit and surface-mounted clutter, and those were identified as things that should be removed over time. On something like this, if you were to impose this as a condition on the Mills Act, the way it would probably be put together is that it would be put together that within the next 5-year cycle of ownership of this home, that repaint to its original colors would be accomplished. And that what the city is required to do on the Mills Act contracts is periodically go back and determine whether the property is being maintained in the manner in which it was designated and agreed to within the contract. So if at the end of that term that the paint issue is discussed, if the painting was not restored, the city could cancel the contract for breach of contract. So that's how you put teeth into a Mills Act contract on things like this. It wouldn't be a condition that you can't have one without doing the painting, but you might enter the Mills Act contract with the understanding within the next X number of years, the painting is restored to its original color. And then the city would evaluate after that point, if it's not been done, for a possible cancellation of the contract.
Bill?
Understandings don't work. They really don't. What the people who enter into a designation understand and what the next owner understands, it's amazing what they don't understand on a very personal experience. And actually when where I live was designated, it was there was a discussion, and I think it's in the report, that the desire was to return it to its original colors. I think that's buried in that document somewhere. Well, that's an interesting discussion we're having in my community. But more to the point of, if we are designating this for integrity, for representing a particular architect's work, this white building with an orange door is not it. So I'm more with Todd on making it a condition of approval. If that's what I'm hearing from him.
Linda?
When do we expect the Class 2 ordinance to come back to us?
It doesn't come back to you.
Oh, it doesn't?
No, no, it goes to City Council tentatively, as I had described, on November the 28th, with the idea that adoption and the effective date would be within about 30 to 45 days after that. So I would expect sometime after the first of the year that that ordinance would become effective if City Council does approve it.
Okay, thank you.
Dan?
If somebody were coming before us with a presentation like this as a Class 1, could we then designate it as a Class 2 without an application specifically for a Class 2? How is that going to work?
Correct, you could do that. That based on your evaluation and the testimony presented to you, if you find that it doesn't meet the criteria for Class 1, then you could recommend designation as a Class 2 structure. So it doesn't require a separate application to be filed, but rather you, based on the criteria that you have adopted, would be able to make that determination.
Any further questions or discussion of staff? I'll entertain a motion, please.
Mr. Chair?
Please.
I move that we accept the staff report with the condition that the existing paint color be identified as a non-contributing element, and the requirement that it be returned to its original paint color.
In order for it to receive its Class 1 designation?
Yes, as a condition of approval.
I'll second the motion.
There's
So,
our second.
just so I understand, what you're saying is, in order for this to move forward and become a Class 1 designation, the paint color has to be restored. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
That's correct.
Okay, I'll second.
Okay. For discussion, then that paint is going to have to come back to the Historic Site Preservation Board for review. Okay? All right, just be clear on all of that. Ken?
All I was going to suggest is that the mechanism in which you may make that motion happen is that you make your recommendation with that condition. It's carried forward to the City Council with your recommendation that this thing go forward as a designated Class 1 only upon the condition of the painting being restored, and perhaps it gets done within X number of months, so you put a time frame on it.
And the maker of the motion is okay with that?
Yes.
And our second?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And for a time period within a year. And I would also like to see the concrete block removed from the front wall and some alternate proposed.
Maker of the second? Okay, thank you. Any other questions and/or discussion on that? We have a motion on the floor with the second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for your patience this morning. Our meeting got a little hijacked early on. Thank you for coming. All right, unfinished business on our agenda, we have none. New business, we have none. We will move on to discussions. We've had our discussion on 5A, the La Plaza Theater. I'd just like to add my own personal comments on that. I think the presentation was excellent. I think JR's proposal for establishing a new board and/or commission that would oversee it, some fundraising efforts, all of that is really good. He tasked this board with keeping it current, keeping it fresh, so let's keep that moving forward. All right. The Cornelia White House update. Ken, please.
Mr. Chair, I don't have a lot of detail on this at this point, but I will advise that what the contractor and Public Works are running into at the house are some conditions that they did not anticipate. Things are not necessarily more deteriorated than what they were, but they're running into situations where some of the structural assumptions that were made are not what they're finding once they open up the walls. Currently, they're looking at a proposal to revise the manner in which they go about installing the new concrete piers that go underneath the floor. What this requires is, right now underneath that floor, the things that are holding that floor up are a bunch of trailer jacks and a bunch of concrete blocks and pieces of wood and things like that. And in the scope of the work, all that stuff is to be removed. A series of kind of cube-like concrete squares, roughly 18 inches by 18 inches, are brought in and then placed underneath the structural members of the floor. The issue with the findings that they're having is that they're going to probably wind up taking out the floors room by room in order to not compromise the structural integrity of the home. So they're going to be doing a little bit more of a surgical approach to getting these piers installed to re-support the floor than what we anticipated previously. There are some change orders that are going to be coming through from a cost perspective that the Assistant City Manager will be processing with the City Council. And what I'd like to suggest, and I spoke with the contractor this morning about this, I'd like to bring the board, if it's interested, in small groups like we do with our typical Class 1 site inspections, to see some of this work as it's going on. It's going to be difficult to actually go into the house, but I think it's going to be an interesting thing for the board to see what they're uncovering here. And the whole purpose of doing this documentary on this is really coming into play now, because we're really seeing really interesting stuff that you would not have anticipated. And of course, according to one of the contractors, the fact that it's standing still seems to be even more and more amazing each day. So that's basically the report I have for you today. What I'd like to do with the December meeting is I'll bring you some photographs. I don't know how busy people's calendars are as we're heading into the holiday seasons, but if that notion of doing some small 2 or 3 person walkthroughs is of interest to the board, I'll try to get something like that set up.
I think the board would yes, I see.
Yes.
We're
Yes.
in agreement on that, certainly.
Okay.
Certainly.
Then I'll work on that.
All right, thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Our next item for discussion is the National Preservation Month Symposium 2019. Mr. Burkett.
At our recent subcommittee meeting last week, we reviewed many details. However, I've just narrowed it down for today to just give you an update of some of the highlights. We had our goal for November to be able to get confirmations for each of the components for both days. I'm very happy to say we have been able to achieve that, except for one workshop that we're waiting on, and just one panel member, which is looking very good. That's going to happen as well. One thing I wanted to share with you that I thought was really interesting is in my interviewing the panelists this is the current Palm Springs architects who will be talking about how Bauhaus movement influenced their work, as well as those of other significant, noteworthy architects between the 40s and the 60s. Dwayne Smith, who's a young architect here, has a most interesting story to share, which I think the audience is going to really appreciate. The fact that while he was studying industrial design in Canada, the Bauhaus offered a special program for just 6 Canadians and 6 Russians to go to Dessau for 6 months for an advanced program. And he's going to be sharing those stories of what that was like. So here's somebody that's really been up close to it, touched it, felt it. I think it's going to be really interesting. And while he was there, he experienced the completion of the Gropius building. So that was kind of a very interesting find. Also, we've added the William Kreisel exhibit, which has now been at the main library. They're going to be out in the lobby. That's created by the Twin Palms neighborhood. It's really a extremely professionally done exhibit. So I'm very happy to add that. One thing I'd like us to begin to think about is the award nominees for discussion on our December meeting. Maybe staff could create a doodle sometime for all members to submit ideas prior. Just a little bit of refreshment from the last few years. We've had a legacy award. That's the contributions that were made to Palm Springs Preservation Community, restoration for both homes and or commercial, rehabilitation for homes or commercial, and historic district. And doesn't mean that we're relegated just to those categories, but just to give you a little bit of reference for everyone to be thinking about. These have become very important awards, and I think that we found that the recipients, the honoring that they are getting, that just helps support continued preservation and an interest in preservation. So I'd like for us, if we could, put that on the agenda for December, and if you think it would be helpful, Ken, to have an advanced doodle of different, to get us started, that might be helpful as well.
Would you just clarify what you mean by a doodle?
A doodle poll. I know what he means.
My higher tech boss would be able to help you with that.
Oh, my goodness. I said something that Ken doesn't know.
Oh, my God.
I probably used the wrong terminology. Okay. Then also, this year we've decided, to do special recognition to the owners of designated Class 1 properties. That would go from last April up until this year's program. So far, we have two. We have A and B. You can eliminate C, but we have two that we have designated. It doesn't mean that something can't still come in between now and April, but at this point, there are two different designations that we've made this year. So that's pretty much it. We'll be having another subcommittee meeting in December and continuing to move this along. We've got our hands full, obviously, with the full day of workshops on the second day. And one of those workshops, by the way, Ken's going to be talking about, again, Class 1, 2, 3 nominations and the economic benefits. We had that workshop last year for the Board of Realtors. We had a very nice turnout. We had it on the second day of our event. And I would like to invite the Board of Realtors to come again, those that were not there to participate. I think it's just a great, simple 30-minute 101 on the advantages and just sort of the groundwork. And I think the more that we can work with the real estate community, it's going to be, everybody's going to be more comfortable and more happier. So thanks to the subcommittee for making all of this happen.
I'm sorry, Linda. Dick has mentioned the William Kreisel exhibit created by the Twin Palms neighborhood at the Palm Springs Library right now. Dick, I think it's fantastic that you have gotten this exhibit moved to, or that it will be mounted during the HSPB event.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't gotten over to the library, it is really incredible. It's incredible what this neighborhood and this Eric Scheel has put together. So I just really commend you. That was a real get. So great. I'm looking forward to seeing it again. Any other questions of
Yes.
Dick on his presentation just now?
Remember the house that was designated off of Prescott, the gingerbread type?
Sure.
Where are we with the renovation on that house, and would that fit into one of these categories? I mean, I think that what they're doing there is phenomenal, the way they saved that house.
They, the owner on that particular project have submitted a building permit for the project. I don't know where it stands right now. It's probably still in the plan check process with the building
thank you.
department.
Vincent, please.
Dick, have we actually changed the dates for the weekend of the symposium? Not as yet?
No, they're staying the same.
Okay.
Right, Lynn? Yeah, they're staying the same. The Convention Center was not available to the other dates, so they're staying the same.
Okay. So the dates are
14th and
14th and 15th?
Of April. 14, 15 April. Ken, did you have something?
No, just a sidebar comment. In looking at, the board had a fairly rigorous debate this morning over the issue of color. And I see that on your list of potential special recognitions, we have another white house that caused the board some angst. And I just want the board to make sure that as you look at what you do with the giving out of awards, that you keep your awards special and that you keep them limited. Because I think that if everybody gets one every single time they do something, the importance of your awards begins to be watered down. And I think when you've got houses that have this kind of potential question on the issues of integrity, I think they're ones that you want to factor in as you look at who you choose to potentially give awards to and recognitions to. That's all.
Duly noted. Thank you, Ken. That completes your presentation on the Preservation Month Symposium. 5D, Wellwood Murray Memorial Library Courtyard Restoration. Ken Lyon.
Mr. Chair and the board, as you know, the library board and the HSPB subcommittee on the Wellwood Murray Library have been working for a long time working on what the actual content and design of this courtyard should be. It was taken to the Architectural Advisory Committee meeting a few weeks ago at the request of the two subcommittees because there were some issues that the two subcommittees were having a hard time finding some common ground on. So the recommendations from the AAC were submitted to staff, and I will be working with Jay in engineering as well as with Jeannie Kays at the library to put this thing together, hopefully in December, to come back to the board, full board for a certificate of approval. The good news on the process is even though it's been an arduous and sometimes highly debated scope of work on this project, the process is yielding, I believe, from what I'm seeing, a good outcome. And I think the board's work on this and your encouraging of the library board to look at this from a historic perspective is paying off for you. And so I think that when this does come before you, I think the board will see a project and a product that that you will find as approvable.
Thank you, Ken. Anything else on the Wellwood Murray Courtyard? No? All right. Citywide Historic Resource Inventory and Context Statement. Ken?
Just very briefly, did a presentation to the 1PS group. This is not the presentation. This is just some images. Over at the city corporate yards, that was what I would call a standing room only, or room, because it was, of course, the 1PS's overall monthly meeting. But explained what the survey was about, it explained the inventory, Here, the lovely Carol Merrill is presenting one of the slides, and it was really an exciting morning for them. And I think it places ourselves in a good first step in terms of the rollout of this thing, both to the community and then ultimately getting it teed up for city council approval.
All right, any questions of Ken on that? Okay. Oh, please, Todd.
Did we discuss doing an LGBTQ component to that?
It was discussed and it was identified that there's already content in the context statement regarding that.
But it's not called out? Because I actually went through it and maybe I just didn't see it. Is it just?
It's there. I
just didn't see
can't
it?
point out what page number it's on, but it is there because
Okay.
I remember reading
Okay,
some of that
great.
content as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Lyon, maybe if you'd go through your next steps on the context statement.
So what's happening on this is the next step that we will be doing is sending out letters to each individual property owner whose property was listed as a potentially eligible historic site, so that as they receive this information, they are clear on what it means, so that when we get this ready to prepare to present to the city council, the citizens who are involved with it are also supportive. So we're still looking to try to get this to the city council as soon as possible. We had a little bit of challenge trying to get our mailing labels to be able to spit out correctly, but we've gotten that problem solved as well. So we're on our way.
All right, Ken, thank you. Linda?
Approximately how many letters will be going out?
Several hundred.
Great,
Several
several hundred.
I would have thought more, so that's a good manageable number. Okay. Anything else on the Historic Resource Survey? Inventory? No? 5F, discussion, update on recommendations for revisions to the Palm Springs Municipal Code 805, Historic Preservation Ordinance. Ken and Flynn, please.
So, Mr. Chair, as I had indicated earlier in the meeting today, that we are tentatively scheduling that ordinance to be considered by the City Council at their November 28th meeting. Again, I'll have confirmation of that later this week. In terms of the ordinance itself, as you'll recall, the Historic Site Preservation Board recommended approval of the ordinance with some minor modifications at your meeting last month. We met with the City Council Subcommittee on the ordinance, which is members Coors and Mayor Pro Tem Roberts, along with Vice Chair Burkett and Mr. Lavoie. Unfortunately, Mr. Hayes, you were out of town when we got together, and discussed the potential ordinance. They had concerns that we were a little bit too far-reaching in terms of the applications that would be required to come before the Historic Site Preservation Board. And so what they've recommended is that we come forward with a modification to the draft ordinance to have those properties that are identified on our historic survey as being potentially eligible for designation being the ones that would come forward to you for review for any significant alterations or demolition. And so that narrows down the list that was discussed earlier from your public comments significantly to those properties that are identified in the survey. Now, one of the issues is that the survey list of potentially eligible properties is not 100% complete. We believe there's some additional work that our consultant will need to do, specifically looking at gated communities that may not have been surveyed, and there's a number of other properties. And so as part of this process, we will need to expand that slightly. I do have funding in my budget to cover those costs, I believe. And so I think that's something that is easily doable. So as part of the process, again, City Council will consider the ordinance, hopefully November the 28th. In the ordinance process, there is first reading, there is second reading, and then an effective date. Member Dixon had questioned, when will this become effective? And we anticipate, if everything goes according to schedule, that it will become effective in January. One of the reasons why Ken is working very diligently on bringing the citywide historic resource inventory and context statement forward is so that we can have City Council approve that about the same time that they approve the ordinance, since those two items will go hand in hand with each other. And so that's the status of it. And again, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
And I do have one. I spent the last few days reviewing a lot of our minutes to the meetings, and I had them all printed up this morning, and of course you don't see them here because they're still on my kitchen counter. But I do recall in discussions on the revisions to the ordinance that there were several times the conversation came up to include the Sustainability Commission in a discussion. so that the only board that would either approve or deny a demolition was based on its historic qualities. The conversation came up during the Crocker Bank discussion, Howard Lapham, corner of Palm Canyon Drive-In, Sunrise Laverne there, that there was no conversation, the Sustainability Commission. And so I don't know at this juncture with the new ordinance whether that got wrapped in. Is the Sustainability Commission going to have a voice in something that gets demolished if it's not necessarily historic, so that there's a secondary review?
At this point in time, no. The Sustainability Commission is working independently on standards for recycling of construction and demolition materials. I anticipate that this is something that might come together probably mid-year next year once they have done their work. But at this point in time, no.
Okay. Because does the board recall that we were tasked with, we were the only decision maker here. And we did raise this question, that there should be a secondary board or commission who also has a voice, and that was the Sustainability Commission. So I'm just raising it at this point, but we'll see something maybe.
I anticipate, yes, that you probably will. What they will be looking at is, again, as I had mentioned, how to recycle materials from construction sites, from demolition sites. Ultimately, they may want some type of a review process associated with that, and then that ties in neatly with our requirements relative to Historic Site Preservation Board review of demolition. So, again, I think that those two could be married together, but I don't anticipate that happening until probably middle of next year.
Okay. All right, thank you. Please, Todd.
Can you, with the people in the room who are in the room, can you quickly go over what's in the ordinance that helps prevent these projects from having to come before us? There's a great deal written into the ordinance that can be approved without us.
Exactly. One of the things that's different between the moratorium and the draft ordinance is that under the moratorium, there isn't any staff level of discretion, if you will, in terms of being able to approve things. It's either, it's more than 25%, it's more than the threshold requirement, then it's held. Anything less than that can go through the process. What will be different with the proposed ordinance is that the ordinance will allow the Historic Preservation Officer to make a determination that if it's certain things, again, like-for-like repairs, there's a number of other things that we have in there that the Historic Preservation Officer will be able to approve at an administrative level. And again, that's not an ability that we have under the moratorium currently. So there will be some things, again, that can be done administratively with the input of the City Council. They want to restrict the Historic Site Preservation Board reviews of major alterations to those that are potentially eligible for designation. Again, that's going to cut down the list significantly, and much more will go to the Historic Preservation Officer at an administrative level.
Thanks. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Please.
To unpack that for you? Okay. Right now, to be a Class 3, you have to be of a certain age. And in the ordinance, we had changed that to a floating number because the older we get, the buildings that we may have been involved in designing become historic, and that's a scary place to be, believe me. So rather than just age, if it has been, it also needs to be identified in this survey that we're talking about. This is. How do we get the survey? It hasn't been adopted yet. It's only in draft form. But
it is available on the city's website.
It's available online. Yeah. So you can get it, you can look up your address, you can see if the property was identified as being potentially historic. That will make it a Class 3 as opposed to everything over a certain age. Am I right? Yeah. So that's the importance of that document tied into the revision to the ordinance.
what's the website? Is it the city website?
Correct. Yeah, it's on the city's website. If you go to city departments, it's under the planning department, and there's a link for historic resources. And if you stay with me after the meeting, I'd be happy to show you the site.
Dick?
I'd just like to emphasize again, as Ken said, there are probably a couple hundred that are on that survey, possibly. So we're not, it narrows down, I think, more of the concern of the thousands that originally thought about. So I think that's an important piece of information I really wanted you to have, because it makes all the difference in the world.
The whole Association of Realtors needs to know about it.
Right.
Not just those of us sitting here.
Right, yeah, exactly, yeah. So I think that's an important, very, very important part. Because, well, anyway, that's where.
Anything else, please, on discussion item 5F? Okay, seeing none. I will go to now, please, 5G, a debrief on the Fall Modernism Week. Ken?
Nothing more than we did have the booth. Rosemary had a standing room only crowd at the convention center for the October show, and we had to be placed in the lobby, but we were there. So the presence of the HSPB booth was still there.
And perhaps because of this accident, we had high visibility. We had extremely high visibility there right at the entrance into the show. So, a gift horse?
It was a big thank you to Rosemary.
Yes, well, I mean, I thought, again, I'm very pleased that we see this presence at the Modernism Week show. So thank you for your efforts on continuing that. I added 5H to the agenda, if you don't mind, and this is a discussion. When I mentioned that I had reviewed a lot of the minutes to our meetings that I've left at home, in last spring, in the spring of 2017, April, May, June, we began a discussion here at this board about the downtown park and the naming of that downtown park, and including historical elements in that downtown park. I will reference the letter that the Historic Site Preservation Board drafted and sent to Mayor Moon, Pro Tem Ginny Fote, Councilmember Jeff Coors, Councilmember Chris Mills, and Councilmember J.R. Roberts. So you can see that this predates our current council. What we did then at that time, we asked the city to include historical elements in the downtown park and to consider naming the park for Nellie Kaufman. So I guess what I'm questioning now is, did we ever receive any kind of response to the letter? Where did the letter actually go besides to the mayor and to the council, and then did it go into the sort of the round file, if you will? And while you're thinking about that answer, and the answer is not what I'm really asking about, but this is a designated Class 2 site. Yeah. And so as a Class 2 site, the city is obligated to plaque this site. I saw half a nod. Yeah.
I'm doing this, but he's doing that.
Okay. So, I mean, this is a discussion item. So what I wanted to do is to remind the board that we did ask the city to consider the inclusion of the Desert Inn gates. What preceded this meeting, you might recall, that Tracy Conrad came to the board and introduced herself as the new president of the Palm Springs Historical Society. This is about 16, 17, 18 months ago already. And it was Tracy who brought to our attention that these gates exist and that the gates are still very much in play as a part of a historical element that may be included in the downtown park. We learned, and I have evidence of this and had photographs of it, that there was a historical marker on Palm Canyon Drive at the entrance to the Desert Inn Fashion Plaza that then became the Fashion Plaza. There was a large boulder, quite a large boulder, with a plaque on it designating, informing that these were the grounds of the Desert Inn. And so I think, what we're asking for, is the city not already obligated to designate, plaque, identify the park? Some of the ideas that we had at the time, an informational kiosk with the history of the Desert Inn and the Historic Site Preservation Board Class 2 plaque, any additional remaining artifacts from the Desert Inn. In the minutes, Dick, you had actually brought up that there are known other artifacts of the Desert Inn that exist, and that why wouldn't those be included? We asked at the time that the Nellie Kaufman Star be installed at the new downtown park. Nellie Kaufman Star, which had long ago been removed from the Walk of Stars, is indeed returned to the Walk of Stars. It's there right about the new Starbucks on Palm Canyon Drive. So what I'm hoping to do today is to ask staff, how do we keep this alive? How do we keep this in the city's process? Because as Mr. Price mentioned earlier, meetings have begun with city council members to update, inform, educate, entreat participation in getting the park plaqued, identified, markered, but it seems like we're asking for something that the city's obligated to do. So I want to keep this alive beyond the termination of my chairmanship here next month, and hope that this continues into next year with the board. So any ideas?
Yes, I do have a couple of thoughts.
Thanks.
Number one, in terms of the gates, as you'll recall from one of the presentations that was given by Rios Clemente Hale, that they have reserved space for the gates should they become available. So again, if you attended any of the meetings on the park, I'm assuming you all did, that you heard that same thing that I heard. And again, there is place in the park to be able to do that. And it was at the southeast corner of the park where they were looking to make that space available for the gates. The second thing, in terms of how can you keep those things at the forefront of City Council, keep in mind that they're dealing with a lot of different push and pull from members of the community in terms of the design of the park. Attending any City Council discussions on the park is a good time to bring those up, especially coming up with the naming of the park. That's going to be critical, and as well as inclusion of other things in terms of the plaque. Again, that's something that's very easy for us to incorporate as part of that. Is the plaque required? No, it's not required. It's designated as a Class 2 site, and certainly that's something that we would want to see a plaque on and some type of informational display being made available for that. And so, again, that's something that can be incorporated. The construction documents are coming up close to their 100% finality here, I believe, within the next month or two. I'm assuming that those will be presented to City Council, so that's our next opportunity. Now, in addition to that, City Council has also appointed liaisons to each of its boards and commissions, and Mayor Moon is the liaison to the HSBB. And so you may also forward that information to him. He already has had a copy of the letter and is aware of the ideas that have been forwarded by the Historic Site Preservation Board, but sometimes a reminder of those might be helpful.
All right. So continuing this thought, of course, we have two city council members now who are not aware of this letter unless it is brought to their attention, which independently that has been done. My understanding in a conversation with the designers of Rios Clemente Hale, they were not instructed by the city to identify an area of the park, and that they were asking for a specific direction from the city to identify an area of the park, large, small, left corner, right corner, but that there is not in the final drawings an identified area for this historical element. With or without the gates, I trust that the Historical Society will persevere and that they will get the gates, but if the gates were not ever a part of this, the marker that did exist, that the developer lost, Michael Braun's own words, lost during the redevelopment of the site, that at a minimum should be included in the park. So it's just a discussion, not looking for an action item here other than keeping it alive.
Let me ask this question. What is the status of the gates currently? When will they be delivered to the city?
I don't have that information.
Okay.
I don't have that information.
That would be certainly helpful, I think.
Understood. But what I want to try to do here is, regardless of the availability of the gates, this should not depend on the gates. An identification of the park as the former site of the Desert Inn should be a factor, should be a mandatory inclusion, with or without the gates. The kiosk, the big rock, a plaque.
And where is the rock?
The rock is gone. I have photographs of it. It was a considerably large boulder, what you would expect, and it was on Palm Canyon Drive. It's on the kitchen counter at home.
The rock isn't on the kitchen counter. The
But no,
picture
it
is
was
on the kitchen counter.
It was a considerable boulder, and it had a bronze plaque on it that said, on this site in 1919, Miss Nellie Kaufman developed the Desert Inn, and it was all right there, and it was quite a... Now, from the time it was installed back in 67 or 68, upon the opening of the Desert Inn Fashion Plaza, when the bell tower was still there, if you go back that far in your memory and of historic photographs, the boulder was prominently placed. Over time, landscaping grew up around it, and it became quite lost in the landscaping. And, you know, fortunately, I was made aware of it, and I took photographs of it. And when Michael Braun of Grit Development was asked about the boulder, it was lost. Linda.
Is Michael Braun responsible for replacing this boulder with a plaque on it? Or you have a picture of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he should be held to the task.
Well, actually, the plaques come from the city. We're the ones who produce the plaques.
In this particular...
Right, but the
Yeah.
rock with the plaque
Yeah.
is missing because of Michael Braun.
Flynn,
So,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to clarify. It was the County of Riverside. It was a County of Riverside marker. So.
Oh, who put it there in
Yeah,
place?
Yeah. And because it says right on it, it says County of Riverside. I will send you the photos.
Okay.
And so that you can actually see
So-
what it looked like.
So
and-
the original is gone, and then we
Yes.
need to reproduce it, basically.
Or something, yeah.
Yeah,
So I don't
okay.
want this to all hinge on just the gates, because, you know, there are other elements. One might go so far as to suggest that that Nellie Kaufman star that got put back in front of the Starbucks be moved to the park. So please, let's keep this conversation and discussion alive.
And if you want to draft a new letter to all of the city council members, we're more than happy to do that again.
I would like that very much.
Okay.
Does the board agree on that? Please, thank you.
Okay.
No, very much, thank you.
and can we ask the letter to say that the lost rock needs to be replaced by Michael Braun?
Well,
May I suggest, on the issue of the marker, if you'll send me those photos, I think I've seen photos of this marker that
Sure.
you're talking about, because I've got that stuff in
Back
mind.
in the day, the Desert Sun covered this extensively.
Right.
When we had a reporter that was on the local beat, Xochitl Peña, you might remember Xochitl Peña. She covered the missing
Marker.
marker, the Nellie Kaufman star, all of that. And so this is well documented in Desert Inn articles.
My only point is that we can take care of the issue of the marker, whether it's a county marker or not. We can make that kind of stuff, I think, happen. Whether the marker gets placed on a boulder again, I think you need to be open-minded about where the marker goes and what you place it on so that it gets its best viewing.
Right.
Maybe a rock isn't where you want to put it anymore. Maybe there's a more appropriate place to put it once the park development comes along.
And I
But
appreciate it.
we can coordinate that stuff.
If I can, in this piece that was distributed to you all today, there are there are 2 letters you'll see from the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation written at 2 different times to the city, discussing the marker, discussing the identification of the plaza, of the park. And you'll see that in one of these, there was actually a direction. Therefore, we ask that Rios Design Studios be directed by your office to identify an area for an historical element in the downtown park, because Rios Clemente Hale instructed me that we don't have that in our program. The city never gave that to us in our program. So we're still looking at getting that an area identified. The letters went on to say that the Rios Clemente Hale is a very talented design firm. They do parks all the time. They know what they're doing, and that they could easily create. It doesn't have to be the old boulder with the rusted plaque on it. It might be a new contemporary kind of marker that would be a part of a newly designed park. So just keeping it forward, moving it forward, and keeping it in the public eye. Thank you for offering of a follow-up letter, stressing what the HSPB's recommendations, desires are. Okay, I'm out of breath. Todd.
On the park, I just found out that the Illuminaire House was taken out of the programming. Can you speak to that?
It is not part of the budget for the park. The site is still available for the Illuminaire House. So it still could potentially go there. The city council hasn't made a formal determination one way or the other in terms of, is it going somewhere else? So there is still that portion of a block that's available for the Illuminaire House.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Please.
A couple of things. One is, have we had any new word on the Racket Club?
You know what, we're not on to board member comments yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, we're gonna, let's just finish this discussion item.
Oh.
That was discussion
That's it.
5H on the HSPB letter. I think we have some resolution on that and some commitment from the board to keep this alive. Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. So then that would complete our discussion items 5H. Now, board member comments. Thank you, Dick.
Sorry.
It's
Okay. Racket Club, has there been any new activity that you know of, Ken, on that?
Excuse me, I have heard that the party that was interested in the Racket Club that the city met with and the current owners met with last summer apparently are still interested in moving forward with closing the escrow on it. I don't know the time frame and I don't know the terms. Flynn mentioned it only very briefly to me last week. When he returns to the chair, he may have some extra information he can give you, but it sounds like it's moving toward a potential sale.
So it's still alive?
That's what it sounds like.
Okay. I noticed that on the Planning Commission meeting tomorrow, just for a matter of information, the Orchid Tree is coming back asking for a 2-year extension on their entitlements. And so that looks like that project is still viable. My question, Ken, to you is, I would like to recommend that what the city did with the Town and Country requirements for security, that be used as a benchmark, which has, the very substantial fencing at a height that's more difficult to transcend, and has cameras. Interesting, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who's lived here for many, many years, said that when the fire happened at the church, it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and before it was really discovered to the fire department, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. So they have security cameras tied into a system like we have at Town and Country, that could have been caught much earlier. So I have at least 5 code enforcement request that I made over the last several months on the entrance being made multiple times, cutting that fence. And some of it is the walls. I mean, it doesn't take much to scale those walls. So otherwise, we are going to be subject to another possibility of fire. The winter is coming, that people are going to be looking to get, comfort from the elements. So if we could, and I don't know if I'd like your advice, if it's appropriate to ask of the Planning Commission to include this, or if it's something that I should take a different direction. But I just think it's really important that this property be protected. Otherwise, we could lose it.
I don't know the agenda for tomorrow's Planning Commission hearing because I just haven't had time to see it. But what you're saying is that their time extension request is on that agenda.
Right.
Yes.
If this is something, and I'm thinking off the top of my head, but I think that what could be done here as a citizen or any other person interested in this project, if you were to either send an email or a letter or show up at the Planning Commission meeting and speak at the time of public comment.
Okay.
That this is something that you would like the Planning Commission to consider adding as an additional condition of approval on their time extension. I think that would be one way of getting it to the Planning Commission, given the short time we have between now and their meeting tomorrow. So I think that's a way that you as a citizen, this group as the board, you could sign it collectively if you wanted, but I think it's a matter of getting it in the form of a written public comment or oral public comment to the Planning Commission as early as possible before their meeting, if you can, or else at the time of public comment at the meeting, to say that as a part of their consideration of granting a time extension, that they impose an additional condition of approval to require improved security at the site.
So I could send either an email to the chair and or show up and or both.
Yes, I would suggest if you send an email that you send it to the chair and copy Flynn.
Okay. All right.
Or you can copy the case planner. I think it's David Newell, but
I will do that.
Copy a couple of us so we all know it, and that way we can make sure that it gets before them for consideration.
Okay. And my last thing is it when would it be appropriate to make mention of the status of the Rael project request? The status of the Rael project request that Ms. Floss made? Next meeting, or?
Hopefully we can bring some information back to you. For the benefit of the board and people watching, the Rail project, which is the large mixed-use project at the north end of the downtown, had as a mitigation measure in its CEQA documentation, reconstruction of elements of the canopy that was along the frontage on Palm Canyon for the Strebe Theater. And the project went through several different design iterations, and the last one seems to be such that that canopy feature, which had a series of slotted openings and then a round opening and pipe columns, seemed to have been lost from the final building permit set of drawings. And Edward Robertson, who is the case planner on that, and Flynn were working with the designers to see what had happened and how they can get those elements back in. I don't know the status of it right now, but we should be able to know that before the December meeting, that I can bring back some more information on how they're handling it.
And thank you, Ken, for that. And Dick, I'm going to interrupt for just a minute. Those of us with institutional knowledge recall that discussion and considerably, and so it is something that we should try to keep alive also. My recollection is that it was, I don't know if it was a condition, but that this element or this would be replicated or, yes. So thank you for keeping that up. All right, yes, and so that's that. I have one quick thing under board comments. We discussed Del Marcos Hotel at last month's meeting and the change to their parking there and how this is looked at as upon as an improvement and all of that, et cetera, et cetera. But currently the building is being repainted. Now, the building is undergoing an extensive repaint, a change in color, and so I'm wondering if that went to the to the counter, to the staff. We certainly did not see a repaint of the Del Marcos Hotel. Now, what I would offer here is that if you, and I have photos, they're not here.
On the kitchen table.
The building is being, it's going from sort of a very faded mustard yellow to an intense dark red, reddish brown. And so in discussing this with some of our other local historians, the original Hotel Del Marcos was clad in redwood. So it was not painted, it was a redwood clad building, and that redwood still exists there. The yellow was painted onto the redwood, and that perhaps this paint color that they're doing is trying to more accurately affect that redwood color back from the 1940s. But my question is, we didn't see any of the changes or improvements currently going on at the Del Marcos Hotel. We didn't see the parking. We didn't see the new wall that went up, the fence that came down, and the new wall that went up. And now we're not, of course, seeing the painting either.
This is the first that I've heard about the painting, so I will find out. The Del Marcos Hotel is a commercial building. As a commercial building that goes through a repaint that has a change of colors, it's required to go through the city for architectural review. So if the owner has missed that, we will bring that to the owner's attention. I can find out whether or not there was any type of an application that was processed over the counter. I have never heard of anything about it in the last few weeks. So I think that your observing this and bringing it to our attention is important, and it sounds like it's one that we have to look into to remind the owner that he does have an obligation, both under just general architectural review of a commercial building as well as a Class 1 historic site. Okay. So I'll find out what's going on with that, and I'll report back to the board.
And I will send you the 2 photographs that I took.
Would you please?
It was at dusk, but you can definitely see the yellow and now this dark reddish color. So
it sounds like the kind of thing that should have been brought in. I'll find out what the background is on it is, but these are the kind of things that, you know, we've mentioned this to you before. It is excellent that you guys see this stuff, and it's the same old cliche, see something, say something. Certainly, if this were to come up and you saw it and you wanted to get this to us, the most immediate way is, of course, file a code complaint. Second way is to send Flynn or myself an email.
Right.
Okay?
Right. Okay.
Thank you for letting us know that, and we'll follow up and let you know what's going on there.
Anybody else, any board member comments?
Mr. Chair, earlier this year, we essentially approved a work program for Class 1 designations and for historic district, potential historic district nominations. And I wonder if in December we can recap where we are in terms of those nominations, because intervening with those, there have been nominations submitted from Palm Springs Preservation Foundation, and I understand there's another nomination pending. Today we had a nomination that was owner consent, and it seems like, well, there are outstanding projects that we haven't addressed this year, like the tennis club neighborhood historic district nomination, and the racquet club is still pending. And there are others that are out there that I'm just curious to know what the status of these nominations are. So I wonder if we could schedule that for the December meeting.
Sure.
To go over it.
And I would add the Steve McQueen House
Right.
to that discussion in December, because that was one of our work items, and it's
Right.
Again, in reviewing the minutes, I saw our discussion about that. We looked at the nomination, and then
They were required on McQueen to bring forward information demonstrating and describing how the work that was being done was conforming with the Secretary of the Interior standards. They provided that to us about a month ago, and it's a matter of bringing stuff forward in the time that we have to do it. And it's not lost, It's not fallen off the table, but it is there amongst the list of pending to-dos. That one is ready to take to the city council.
Okay, excellent. All right, Todd,
I mean,
please.
the staff report's not written, but that's where it's at. This
Understood.
next step is
Thank
to
you.
go to city
And,
council.
but to Vincent's point, an update, please, at
Absolutely.
year end on where we were and on our work plan. Thank you, Vincent. Todd?
So, speaking to what Vincent brought up, the budget that the council gave us to do the nominations that we originate here, have we used that budget?
I don't know how much of that budget has been used.
Okay, so then can you add
There
that?
shouldn't have been much used on it because we haven't done any
Yeah, no,
resource
that's what
reports that I'm aware
and
of.
then my part two of that is that a fiscal year allotment, and does it carry over, or do we lose it if we don't use it?
We normally lose it if we don't have it, if we
Yeah.
don't use it.
So, and then what is, it's a fiscal year or a calendar year?
Fiscal year.
And when is
It
it?
begins July 1st through June 31st.
Okay, so we have 7 months or 8 months to use it, right?
There's little time to use it.
Well, but, I
And
mean,
you look at it as a half a year, I look at it as barely a half a year.
well, well, which it makes it more critical that we act on it
Mm-hmm.
ASAP, so we don't lose this as a potential funding source.
Keep in mind, each year you guys do put together a work plan. You never accomplish everything on your work plan, but you gotta set
just wanna
goals.
spend
You gotta
money.
set goals somewhere, right?
Thank you.
Ken, while you're taking your notes and looking at a December agenda, would you please put on the agenda the letter to the mayor relative to the downtown park? Flynn will have a new letter for us by that time, so I'd like to get it on the agenda again for December and try to keep it agendized. One of the things that we did, I think, board very, very effectively is a year or so ago where we put the Cornelia White House on our agenda ad infinitum. And so it was a current every month, at least we had a discussion about it or an update about it. So I'd like to sort of imply that same thing with this, the downtown park and the designation of the park and that kind of conversation ongoing.
Okay.
Ken, thank you. Any other board member comments? Dick, please.
Just one thing. I've been thinking about the discussion we had earlier and the point that Todd made about the importance of historic paint colors. And I think it's a very important one to us. And actually, it kind of fell off my radar screen as well. So I really appreciate your bringing that up and highlighting it. But also, it kind of reminds me of how about a year and a half ago, when Mr. Keelan came on into Palm Springs, and we started talking more about the importance of landscape and its importance to historic properties. And now I think we've added another important layer with the paint color. And I know, Todd, both you and Bill have had a lot of experience in the, I don't know if you would call it forensic work, but what, the process that you can do, you explained a little bit to me, for a homeowner who wants to, or a property owner who wants to go back to find out what those original colors really were. I don't know if there's any sort of education we can do about that, but I'd like to see that going forward. I think we've established, we've strengthened the criteria, and Bill, you brought it up as well when you read about the requirements from the Secretary of Interior, so, or Todd did. So I think that's very important for this board to know, and I think it's very noteworthy that to me, it strengthens this board when we do things like this.
Speaking to that, if I might, actually Dunn Edwards has been very active in the community providing for free that service, where we approached AEG and they wanted, I think it was, what was it, $20,000 to do 5 paint samples or 5 paint scrapings.
Are you talking about the paint company, Dunn Edwards?
Dunn Edwards,
Yeah,
the paint
well, it's
company.
interesting, and that's why I brought that up, is because there's another project that's kind of brewing out there actually, I think with the American Legion, about the painting, and they have not been as receptive about doing this without being awarded the paint contract. So we may have lost that, or maybe we could still work with them about maybe for a X fee, and they still have an opportunity to be in part of the bidding process, because we can't demand anybody what vendor they use. But maybe we could work out something with them, and maybe we should try to pursue that as a board, because I think this is, if we can make it accessible and easy for our property owner to be able to make that assessment, then I think we'll have more receptivity of doing it.
It's just now that it's very expensive. I mean, when at the Racket Club, when we were talking about it, AEG, I think AEG, right, is the only company that's doing it right now, and that was a referral from historians in Santa Barbara. So they seem to be the only ones doing it, and they seem to know that very well. And yeah, the fee for it's astronomical, and could only be borne by an institution and not necessarily by an individual homeowner.
There are ways to more economically do that forensic work that may not be to the extent that they do it.
Yeah.
But, so my reason for bringing this up or to chiming in here is that might be a really great session for the conference that we do. And we could actually perhaps use the Town and Country, because we have that as a case study,
Right.
and say, hey, here's what we did. Now, you may, and here are, and get people to address here as a homeowner, here is a more economical way to try and find out what the original paint colors were for your house, but at least propose that to people so they're aware that, oh, there are ways for me to find out what the original paint scheme was for my house if I don't have the architect. But that could be a really cool, and using the Town and Country as a case study, get those people on a panel to discuss what their options are.
So my question is, do the homeowners who are coming in front of us for a Class 1 designation, do they even realize that paint color is a part of the process?
No.
Well, I mean, I think that we need some sort of cheat sheet or something that we hand out to these people that say, these are the different points that you have to have in order to be recognized as a Class 1, to
Excellent
even
point.
come forward. Because we're talking about paint samples, but this woman didn't even realize about paint samples. I mean, she didn't realize anything. Before she knew the house was what it was, she painted it white. So I think that's got to be the first step, is they have to know that the paint color needs to be recognized as an original paint color.
That's a very good point. I think
It should be included in the HSSR.
What, in the what?
In the Historic Structures Report.
In the Historic Resources Report.
right. And maybe we could create would it be possible, like, to create a cheat sheet, if you will, a fact sheet, or that could be given to somebody, and for, again, the Board of Realtors, maybe? I mean, I just think these are tools. The more we can bring up these tools, the better, the more success we will have, because they have to really be educated to understand what all is required.
I think there's merit to doing some type of a listing of the things to be considered.
Yeah. That's what things to be considered.
The board is going through an evolution of these types of things as well, and I hope you guys appreciate what you guys are doing, because you guys are all on a learning curve as well.
Uh-huh.
And, I've been doing this with the city for quite a long time, and the whole concept of concern about historic landscapes was never talked about. And the idea of, what is the importance of whether the building is is heading toward its original colors or not has never been talked about, or almost never been talked about, within the context of how important you are considering it today. So it's a good thing to do, is the short answer. The longer answer is that if you were to do something like that, it would be a matter of describing and understanding what's original and what's not, such as, and then give your listings: color, light fixtures, windows, doors, walls, fences, landscape, pools, whatever it is. Yeah.
Excellent. Any
Okay.
other board member comments? Staff comments?
I have none today, and I know Flynn stepped out. I don't know if he had any to bring to your attention or not, but if there's anything that I haven't gotten, because I don't have anything on my agenda, we can get it out to you via email.
All right,
That would be
excellent.
helpful.
Seeing no other discussions, seeing no other board comments,
Move to adjourn?
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.